When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite, looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Warning, creators of this game do understand the subject matter may be offensive to some, but they do honor the families and people that have been affected by these real-life tragedies that these individuals have caused. Want to play a game?
Oh, yeah!
Lover of true crime?
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, we got an interesting game for you to check out.
Wow.
With the mashup of influences such as horror movies, collecting cards, and RPGs.
What?
Led to giving birth to an incredible creation of this game, Killers, the card game.
You are all my children now.
This game is a collectible trading card game featuring some of the most infamous killers, with tidbits of trivia on the back of each card to help you learn some insight to each criminal.
Who the hell are you?
Let's not forget, during the game, cops will be chasing you and these criminals.
I'm a cop, you idiot!
However, check out their website listed through all social media today, which can be found under Killers, the card game.
Am I on the internet?
I want to play a game.
This is Supermouth Dave Drason. I'm listening to Crazy Train, the best in the world right now. Please. And if you're lucky, Supermouth will be back.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, I'm happy to have this gentleman back. He is a Detroit wrestling historian, photographer, and the last credited manager for the Sheik. You've heard him before with our charity event we did last year for Children's Hospital. You had heard him on a regular interview before. We also are joined by Dr. Mike Lano, who hopefully will replace this tooth when I can get out to California. But our guest is Supermouth, Dave Drason. Dave, how you doing, sir?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me back, guys.
Right on. And I got to ask, because I know we talk off the air often, Dave, and I saw it as Mike was storming in the room, because I don't know how the hell he got the password again. But what was the wine you were drinking there?
This one today I got, it's a French wine called D66. Technically Department 66, but it's 100% Grenache. Spectacular.
You've got to mention too, Dave has one of the most sought after wine stores. He's one of the biggest global wine experts, seller. He can tell you anything, historian of wine. I mean, let's put wrestling aside. Dave is a bon vivant. He knows like everything about everything. Music, we'll get into hopefully.
Photography, as I mentioned.
Yeah, a little bit.
Certainly knows more than Mike on that one, but no, I tease.
I know he does.
Yeah. But
I had to continually nag Theo Ehret to give me some pointers and be a sensei. It took a little nagging, but he turned out. Dave, how much time, let me just ask off the cuff, when you came out to LA, how much time did you spend with Theo, or were you always looked like you were busy just doing your thing, but perhaps in the back you might have been blabbing with Theo.
I talked to him, every so often, but he wasn't at, a lot of the shows. He, at that time, back in 73, he picked and chose, the shows that he wanted to do. So usually, I'd be up at the ring shooting, and then there was a young kid too, Gary Dubin.
He was only there. He only did it for about 14 months, if that.
Right.
Remember what happened to him? He went into porno. He did some shit film, and God bless him. He was a nice kid, but he ended up doing some porn, some softcore porn.
Yeah, he. When I was out there, he was, doing a couple things with the Partridge Family show. I don't know if he ever got on, but he was a good young kid, and he was enthusiastic about wrestling. But when I was at the, just short of 2 months that I was out there, I was helping Don Wilson and Jeff Walton and everybody in the office. I mean, we set up the shows, we put up the posters, ran the box office. And, once all that stuff was done, I had my camera with me, and I was lucky enough they let me down at the ring to shoot anywhere I wanted. It was a great time. And even the boys, meeting a lot of the boys like John Tolis, when we lived in one of Mike LaBelle's houses in Beverly Hills when I first got there. And then he ended up selling the house like a month later, and he moved us into a beach house in Santa Monica.
Oh, the shithole.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. But Gordon Nelson lived with in the same complex. But the one thing I always remember is John Tolis would always wake me up at like 7 a.m. to go running on the beach.
Right. Well, he was looking for, as he would put it, he was looking for tail, any girl action.
Yeah, I was his wingman.
Well, at that period of time, I'm sure you knew because Gordon. It was weird. Gordon first came in as himself in around August of '72. Then he put on the hood as like a knockoff of Tim Woods. He was a Mr. Wrestling teaming with Don Arnold, who was Dr. Death. That team had the straps for about half the year. Pac Song was there, and Kim Duck when you were there.
Yep. Colosso Colisetti.
Yeah, Colosso Colisetti, Ripper Collins, Ruben Juarez.
Yep.
Raul Mata, Ray Mendoza.
Well, Sonny King came in.
Yeah.
He was shocked to see me there. And it was so funny because just the Saturday before at Cobo, my last, when I was there, the Sheik hit Johnny Valentine with the fire. And they, they built it up that Johnny Valentine was in the hospital and stuff. And lo and behold, that Wednesday, John sees me in L.A. He goes, "What are you doing here?" As I come out to work, with my friends out here for, a couple months, and he was off on his way to Japan.
Yeah. Let me quickly, John, let me just ask this, and I think, Dave, the story. I've told it to you, but maybe you heard differently because you were, at that point you were talking to Johnny. I had to dig this out of him years later when I was trying to do the book Rib with him, our book together. Johnny said that LaBelle promised him the book, and he'd already known Tolis for a billion years, and that was the advertised huge match coming up. So Johnny came in, the famous robe. I took pictures of it at KCOP, Channel 13 that Saturday. And it was for the card 13 days afterwards. So he goes to do 2-3 gigs for New Japan for Inoki. And he gets the call from Mike LaBelle, who said, somehow or other, I've decided not to give you the book. we've got Jules Strongbow's going to stay on a few months longer or something like that. And Johnny told Mike LaBelle to fuck himself. And he instead, I guess, either called or got a call from Sandy or George Scott and went to the Carolinas to book and turn that territory over. Because if you remember, the Mid-Atlantic was kind of, you'd see the results. It was just like the same old man tag teams against each other, George and Sandy Scott, the Becker brothers, Rip Hawk and Swede Hansen. And I couldn't appreciate it. But when Johnny came in there, he just turned that territory on its head. But he never came through at the Olympic at LA for the long advertised huge match with Tolis, and instead Mike LaBelle had to eat crow, beg Vince Sr. to send him Gorilla Monsoon, and it was a horrid match. Whereas Tolis Valentine would have kicked ass, it was just, Monsoon was just too old to be in the ring, and it was, John said he couldn't even carry him. He couldn't carry him to an acceptable match. So what did Johnny tell you? And then I'll shut up and throw back to our host, Jonathan.
What did he tell me about what?
That why he didn't end up coming back. He was supposed to just come right back and
no,
be the face of the territory as Cowboy Rocky Valentine, the idiotic late 50s name that Jules Strongbow, our genius booker, gave him. He hated being called that, and it was in our program, Cowboy Rocky Valentine, although Gene LaBelle said, well, he's wrestling pretty much all over the world as Johnny.
Well, he never told me anything, the reason why he didn't go to L.A., because it was like when I got back to Detroit, after, my LA gig, Valentine came back and, won the strap off the Sheik. The crowd went nuts when they, just his entrance into the ring, not even, when he won the title from Sheik, but the crowd went nuts. And it wasn't about a year later, I left and started my managing career, and I went down to South Carolina, Charlotte, what is that, South Carolina? In Charlotte, North Carolina. Living with Sonny King and Johnny Valentine. That's when he first came there and started, doing a big program there. And I mean, he was there. Flair was just starting to hit, super big. Rip Hawk, Swede Hansen were still there.
Tiger Conway, Flair. Johnny said he put Flair first with Tiger Conway Jr., and Rick was doing like almost, now I don't want to put Flair down because, we all love him, but they were kind of slightly racist promos, and they would not be PC today. The promos he was cutting on Tiger Conway Jr.
Yeah, and that's the reason Sonny King left there too, because it was not a good racial place to be at that time for King. Tiger Conway, that's why Bobo never wanted to go down there. It was a great time. Sonny King tried to get me a spot managing there, but at the time they didn't have managers and they didn't want one. And I think it was George Scott was doing the book then. And he, treated me nice and stuff, gave me a nice letter of recommendation. And, I had a good time there.
Did you get to do some TV or anything on camera?
Never. No, not in the Carolinas. No.
All right, John, I better shut up. You see, Dave and I go way back, and
I
probably talk several days in a row without coming up for air.
Oh, no, it's fine. But as folks will be able to tell, because there's a common like for each other here, and just, I guess, being comfortable between the relationship you guys have, and I've started to build with you over the past couple of years and stuff. But before we continue with the blab session, I wanted to mention, and since we're talking territories and all that stuff, and we'll be all over the place, I just poured my last drink of bourbon because last week we lost Jerry Jarrett, or in the past couple of days, and I'm sure you guys had interaction with him and such, running Memphis and everything else. So Godspeed, sir, and thank you for everything you've done. And I'll leave it to you guys because I'd be curious to know, do you have any Jarrett stories?
I just wanted to say, yeah, because that's what I said too when you asked me to come back co-host with our great friend Dave. I said, can we dedicate the show to Jerry Jarrett? Was just a great storyteller, genius. First as a wrestler, I got to take just a couple of pictures when I would visit family in Atlanta. I would sneak over to Chattanooga, Chattahoochee. This was still Nick Goulas territory, as Dave obviously remembers. But he was teaming with Tojo at that time, taking on Don and Al Green, but also Eddie Marlin and Jackie Fargo. Prior to that, I didn't get to ever meet or shoot Jackie Fargo. Dave, what's your history like? Did you get to come into any of Goulas Jarrett territory, headquartered out of Memphis? And, is Jerry's mom too, Donnie Leibel and I went in there and shot quite a bit of Nashville at the fairgrounds at Miss Christine, Teeny was like running. She, I always credit Joyce and Annie Gunkles being the first female promoters, or in Joyce Farhat's case, being in the office. I don't know if there were towns that she might have promoted. I doubt it. Dave is the expert on that.
Not at all.
But Christine Jarrett eventually went from ticket person to, that was her town that, Jerry let her promote Nashville. And it almost felt like, in a small way, the Dallas Sportatorium, like you could smell funnel cakes and all this fried stuff going on there. It felt like a party photographing there, and she treated us royally. But Jerry was, running around super busy. I don't know. What stories or things do you have, memories of Memphis? You went there for WFIA.
Yeah, that's, I was there a couple times, and Jerry Jarrett, Eddie Marlin, Jerry Lawler, they treated me, with so much respect. Brought me in. They put me on TV to hand one of our WFIA awards. I forgot who we were presenting it to. And then there was a mass tag team. I forget their names. Really nice guys away, off camera and stuff. But they came out and, gave me the business about, presenting the trophy. How come they weren't getting one? And they roughed me up. They tore my shirt, which I wasn't expecting that to happen. But, that happened. And then, doing the stuff with Andy Kaufman and, were
you there at any point when Kaufman was there with like Jeff Walton as Tux?
Oh yeah. Well, no, not with Jeff. I was there when they did the very first Lawler Kaufman thing.
Wow.
Where, he put the brace on and stuff, and Andy Kaufman gave me one of those and signed it. I still have it.
Wow.
And they had on the WWE. They're trying to find the treasures and stuff around the country, and they went to Bill Apter, and Bill Apter gave them one that he had. And Bill and I talked, and we don't know who has the original that was used just after, the Lawler match, and he was in the hospital, and that he wore on the David Letterman show and stuff. But, Bill sold it to him. Hey, God bless him. He made money off it. But I still have one myself.
I'm going to have to send you pictures. Andy's last public appearance when he was battling cancer, and it was a weird period of time. He went to the New Art Theater. I think it's on Santa Monica or Wilshire, almost at the beach. And that's where we'd go for midnight movies and Breakfast with Blassie and Eraserhead and Pink Flamingos. But he had a mohawk, and it was like bleached white. This was Andy Kaufman, and you could tell he looked really in bad shape. We didn't know the extent of the stuff, similar to Jimmy Hardo. I know you talk to regularly. They didn't know at all how bad Andy's cough was. That it was cancer.
Yeah, God bless him.
But he
did a lot for the Memphis territory. He exploded that place when they were. They were drawing good crowds, but once Andy and, because Andy first went to Vince McMahon Sr. with that idea to, wrestle women.
Turned down.
Got it turned down. We don't need you. You can't do nothing for us. Then he, hooked up with Lawler, and man, that territory just exploded week after week for the longest time when he came in.
It's so nuts because then he brings in Cyndi Lauper, and then it's like he sees the success of Kaufman and in Jarrett in Memphis, and then it's time for WrestleMania 1. Vince Jr. Brings in celebrities galore.
I remember I did an interview. This is when I was managing Malcolm Monroe, and we were on TV, and the announcer, knew about my rock and roll, history and stuff, and the way I dressed and stuff. And this is when WWE, or WWF at the time, brought in Cyndi Lauper. And I just laughed, and I said, they go, yeah, she's a really good draw. And I go, yeah, the only thing she could draw is flies.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask, sorry, Dave, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, these days I have a lot of respect for Cyndi Lauper, not for her wrestling junk that she did and what they're doing and Hall of Fame. And, that's just, but I'm a big fan of her talent.
But I wanted to bring up, because I'm more the music and wrestling historian and such with this, but I wanted Mike to take the lead with this. And this was on the notes I sent both of you early this morning, later this afternoon, before all this. Mike, you wanted to bring up some photography stuff with Dave, because I know, as I mentioned in the intro, Dave, photographer among many things. So you want to take the lead on that? Because I know nothing about photography.
Well, I wanted to, before we get into it, because Dave is always, Detroit, Rock City, so many great musicians, Motown, but obviously Dave, we know him with Alice Cooper and Kiss and all of these things, and his incorporation of music into his own character. But I wanted to go back to the start, because I don't know if I've even asked Dave this or ever heard it. And if I did, maybe it's my senility, I've forgotten. But Dave, how did you start watching wrestling? And were you a photographer prior to that, or because of your love of wrestling, or how did you get started with wrestling and photography? I want to see how they merged or might have occurred.
First of all, my getting into wrestling, I knew nothing about it, and at the age of, I think I was 6 years old. My parents owned a 2-story house in, the east side of Detroit, 8294 Olympia, to be exact. Mm. And we had an upstairs, and they rented it out to this couple. And it's like, come to find out, it's Leaping Larry Shane. Wow. And I had no idea who Leaping Larry Shane was as a 6-year-old kid. And next thing I know, my dad on a Saturday afternoon says, he turns on the TV and says, hey, watch this. And it was Motor City Wrestling. And next thing I know, it's my upstairs neighbor. He's wrestling. And I didn't know what wrestling was and stuff. And, I watched it. And, next thing I know, he comes home and is like, wow, I have this famous wrestler living upstairs from me. And, we got to talking and stuff. And, he always played catch with me, baseball catch out in front. And then there would be neighborhood kids who would come along. And it's like, see him, and they knew who he was, and they'd be asking for his autograph. And I had, I didn't understand. And then there was one day that he asked my mother, can I take Dave to the TV studio with me? They did the live TV show at 3:00, and then they had the show at Kobo, later that night. So it was like a build up to that. So Larry took me to the studio with him, and it's like, I'm a little kid, and these other guys there are giants. So we're walking through the hallway of the TV studio, and like 20 feet ahead came out Ricky Cortez, Ricky the Crusher Cortez, out of this doorway. And at the time, he was Larry's biggest nemesis. And I thought, in my mind as a little kid, these two guys are going to fight right in this hallway, and I'm going to be in the middle of it. I mean, I was deathly scared. And then it's like, I don't know if Larry gave him a wink or anything like that. Ricky, backed off into a room, and, he sat me in the front row of these bleacher seats, and I got to watch all the matches. There was like 4 matches. There was an hour show, and they did the interviews, and Larry, I got to see him wrestle. And from them, it was just an obsession with me. Professional wrestling at that point in time became a obsession with me beyond belief, still to this day.
Was this the Alex before or after Alex Karras, that period of time? Because that got pretty major.
No, this is before. Because the Dick the Bruiser, Alex Karras kind of thing, I think, was in 63, 64. So I had already been a fan for a couple of years, watching Dick the Bruiser on TV, hated him. Bobo Brazil was my favorite. I couldn't stand the Sheik at all, so it's, I went from the, loving the baby faces, as probably we all do, to really loving the heels once we, sort of know more and more about, the ins and outs of professional wrestling.
Yeah, because actually the heels sometimes were nicer to the marks, sign the autographs, do all that, than the faces, who sometimes had attitude issues. Was Sheik before he enjoyed or he bought the territory? And that was what, 65 he bought Big Time Wrestling?
64, late in 64 he bought the territory.
So, but when you first started going, was he like a constant presence, or was he like, on the move, helping out Shire, maybe hadn't quite started going to Japan, but maybe going up to Canada or other territories, or was he a consistent presence?
Well, he worked he was more of a mid-card guy, both at Cobo and Olympia. He'd be going against Bob Nandor, could be going against Larry Shane, could be in a tag team with, different kind of guys. But he was always that mid-card guy, never in the main events, at all. Not until, Doyle and Barnett sold him the territory, which really infuriated Dick the Bruiser, because Bruiser wanted to buy the Detroit territory. Because as me and Terry Sullivan did an expose on our Big Time Memory show on Dick the Bruiser sold out the Olympia Stadium and main evented like 26 straight shows, like over a 2-3 year period. I mean, he was the biggest thing in Detroit at the time. And when Detroit was, Doyle and Barnett were going to sell, Bruiser wanted to buy it. But somehow the Sheik, ended up with it. I don't know the negotiations at all, but Bruiser was very let down. He was really mad about it. And when the Sheik bought the territory, Dick the Bruiser tried running, opposition twice. First in 1965, before he tried to do it again in 1971.
The 71 was very memorable because that was like one of the hottest promotional territory wars ever of all time. There was Montreal, Russo's Vachons, Detroit, and then even if you consider Annie Gunkel for 2 years outdrawing the Atlanta Paul Jones, not the wrestler, the promoter office, for quite a few house shows. There was some very cool territory wars.
Yeah. But then you asked about my first wrestling thing. Here, let me tell you the story of my first photography thing. This would have been 1965. I was a kid. I was 11 years old. And in the summertime, kids in, my neighborhood, we played baseball. You'd go to the ballpark, or, the play field, you'd, play baseball. And then it became the echo of the mothers. Lunch, 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 down the block. And all of us kids would leave at that time, we left our balls, bats, and gloves right on the field, went home for lunch, and we came back, and nobody ever touched our stuff. And then it became like 5 o'clock this one time. And it's like 3 of the guys go, hey, yeah, we got to go home. It's like, well, we're still playing. We got, a lot of daylight left. What's going on? Oh, we're going to wrestling at Cobo. And it's like, really? And they go, you want to go? And it was my first time going to a live show at Cobo. So I went home. My mother gave me a couple dollars, for a cheap seat, a hot dog, in a program. And I took my mother's brownie camera. And so now I'm taking pictures. And one that really stands out in my mind, my very first time going to Cobo. Killer Carl Cox, who was a big heel at the time, he's standing on the ring apron and he's just looking up into the crowd and he points up in the crowd. And I thought he was pointing at me, and it scared the bejesus out of me. And so, I'm still taking pictures and stuff with this Brownie camera, and remember the flash bulbs that you had to put in? So after the last bout was over, I opened up the Brownie camera, took out the film to see what the pictures looked like. I didn't know as a kid that you have to have the film developed. So my very first pictures that I ever took of wrestling never came out. Nobody ever saw them.
Oh, you might have had a good shot of that. So were you already taking pictures, playing with cameras prior to? It sounds like you might have, or maybe not.
Yeah, with my mother's Brownie camera. I'd go downtown with her, downtown Detroit, and be taking pictures on the street, like of the Hudson's department store, or, various things that interested me down there. There was 2 Coney Islands that are still in business there, which Lafayette Coney Island and American Coney Island, they're right next door to each other. And they've had a running feud for darn near 80 years. Wow. But I love Lafayette. But I took a picture across the street of both, establishments, and that's what I did. I just loved playing around with, photography. I took pictures of my family and stuff. But when, I started, really getting into the wrestling thing, I could take pictures, and then I started meeting people, pen pals, now everything's on Facebook and stuff, but, pen pals back in the day where you had to write a letter and send it through snail mail, and you trade, information, results, and pictures and programs. Our great friends, Diane Devine and Tom Burke, and, just so many others, Danny Goddard and Vicky Goddard, just so many people over the years, that I traded stuff with. And, just over, time, you learn, better camera, stuff like that. Got to know promoters who would let you shoot up at the ring. So you're not shooting from a, front row seat, and, the guys are way off in the distance. Now you're getting no ropes, and, you're able to capture these great moments in time of professional wrestling. And like Sam Muchnick, I was like one of the very few people that ever got to shoot up at the ringside at Kiel Auditorium. Sam Muchnick let me do that as a kid. And, I still have those photographs. And then when I got to be the photographer for the Sheik at Cobo Arena, what a coup that was for me as a, 15-year-old kid. And, from then on, it's like, I got a lot of great photographs. I've done a couple of books.
How many books do you have on your photos? Some fantastic books.
Technically, one of my own, but Brian Bucantis, he did one earlier that used a few of mine, but so many others like Brian Solomon used a lot of my Sheik pictures in his recent book. James, I'm trying to think, the kid out of Kentucky,
Mark James.
Mark James, he used pictures, and then I just did an interview with a guy the other day who's doing a Dusty Rhodes book, because I knew Dusty when he first came into the territory here, when he first started wrestling. And I have pictures of him when he was an enhancement talent, when he first came in as Dusty Runnels before he became Dusty Rhodes. So, I've had a lot of, good success in, my photography stuff. Problem is, with the internet these days, people are stealing my photographs, out of my books or wherever else that they may appear, and they're using them as their own. And it's like, I'm sure they do that to you, Mike. And there's other photographers around.
Well, we fought that battle with the eBay. We tried to do a class action against that guy, blue-eyed chap that sold your photos, Koichi Yoshizawa's Napolitano, Apters, all of ours.
Yeah.
And he finally is stopping it. But this is a guy who has taken wrestling photos from like the 1920s, Hackenschmidt and that shit, and puts his watermark, Blue-Eyed Chap. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
Never shot a photo. Dan Westbrook went after him, has his full name, address, knows where he is. He's somewhere, I forgot if he's Northeast or Midwest. Florida. What a fucking... And some of the stuff you look at, he copied it out of books. There was a guy named Bob Brown, not the wrestler, but this guy out of Vegas, and he would do the same. I pointed him out to you and Eric Goldenberger a lot, and it was infuriating. But you see Blue-Eyed Chap and this other guy, Bob Brown, you would see like pages behind the photo. So they somehow scanned a magazine or a book photo, but you see like the other pages behind it, and they didn't bother to crop it. And I'm just going amateur hour, and they had big books filled with shit, and they would go to Fan Fest and Cauliflower Alley and stuff and try to sell other people's work, which just infuriates me, that and the video bootleggers. But let me ask you, back to the Coney Island stuff. These are 2 amusement parks still in business?
No, not amusement park. Coney Island hot dogs. Detroit hot dogs.
Oh, okay, so it's like the Philly, the fight between those 2 outfits as to who has the oldest and best.
Yeah, Detroit Conies, they call it.
That's because I'm a huge mark for dark rides, amusement park rides, all the old school stuff. Like when you came out to LA in '73, I think the 2 Oceanside amusement parks, POP and the Pike in Long Beach, were still around. If you might not have ever.
As a kid, I used to go to Chicago. There was Boblo Island in Detroit. There was Edgewater Park. But in Chicago, there was a big place, and I can't remember the name of the amusement park. But I remember that I used to collect all the tickets, because when you'd have to buy a ticket to get on the ride, and they'd tear the ticket. Well, I had like 25 untorn tickets. And I put them in a frame and matted them and everything else with the, picture of the amusement park. So I still have that somewhere in the closet behind me here.
Yeah, I've got all of the A through E Disney old tickets when you had to do tickets, and the Matterhorn was in the Pirates ride, took E's, the best rides, and the shittiest ones were A's, like Mr. Lincoln.
Like so much stuff, memorabilia and stuff in the closet behind me here. Thank God I got, the Sheik looking after all that stuff. Nobody goes in that closet without looking at the Sheik. My gift from superstar Billy Graham, he painted me a portrait of the Sheik. And, God bless Billy, who's in ill health right now, too.
I was going to ask you the story of that because he did some great work. So that's Eddie. That's not Khosrow, who came later.
No, this is Eddie Farhat Sheik. Yeah, you think I'd hang up
Billy? The Jerry Graham never brought Billy in. You know that story how Jerry discovered Billy at some gym. He was driving, I guess, I don't know what happened. He was leaving Detroit, coming back out to do a shot or 2 for LaBelle, or maybe to try to get on LaBelle's cards, and meets Billy Graham there, drags him into, LA. Basically, Billy had 2 or 3 matches teaming with Jerry. This is 1970, around June. And then I think Jules Strong was the one who told Jerry, let me send the kid up to Stu to get trained, blah, blah, blah. But Billy Graham never worked. Did he ever work for Sheik, even a one-shot?
Yes. He worked for him one time. And ever since then, Superstar Billy had so much respect for Sheik. And me and him over the years have, traded emails and stuff and a couple phone calls here and there. And he would always, praise, the Sheik. And, we got to talking, and it's like, I knew he did paintings because he did, one for Terry Funk that I know of. He did a couple other ones, and,
quite a few. Did Patera. He did his friends. They were going to take on Mike LaBelle. You remember that story in '70s? Billy had dropped the title. He was mad Vince Sr. didn't turn him babyface because he was selling the first merch in the Tri-WF area, like T-shirts. He had a whole plan to turn babyface and keep the title. Vince Sr. wouldn't have it. So he came out to L.A., and it was going to be like a Eddie Einhorn IWA thing, he had Ladd verbally agreeing, Koloff and Patera, they would try to run opposition and start in LA against Mike LaBelle, who I guess Billy had, I don't know, brief.
Well, I did a tribute video, like I do a bunch of them. If anybody ever goes to my YouTube channel, if you want to see some of my tribute videos with my photographs, just go to Dave Burzynski on YouTube, and you'll see stuff on Sheik, Bobo, Furpo, Tex McKenzie, Fez, Buddy Rogers, everybody. But I did one for Superstar, and I wanted his approval first before I put it up on YouTube. And he says, I love it. It's beautiful, but please don't put it up. And he explained why. Wow. Because he loved the early stuff that he did, but when he got into that karate kind of thing, he was really embarrassed that he ever did that. So, and I had some of those photographs in there, and that's why he never wanted me to put it up on YouTube, which I, respected his wishes on that.
So who did he work with when he came in to work the one shot for Sheik? Who did he work with, and what was the situation? Or just a one shot?
Yeah, it was a one shot. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think he worked with Bob Backlund, Howdy Doody.
On the Sheik's card?
Yeah.
Really?
And the funny thing about that is Howdy Doody wrestled twice. I didn't understand that either. Nobody in the arena knew who the heck, Superstar was anyway, unless you read the magazines at that time, and nobody knew who Backlund was. But Sheik, was still doing, trying to do his TV stuff, from Kobo. So probably they had Backlund go against, an enhancement talent, and then he went against Billy Graham. I'd have to look in my book here. I'll give it a plug. Mark James. It's like his results of the whole Detroit territory, from 1964 to 1980. You can go on Amazon or whatever, but Mark James' book, he's got results in here of Detroit TV, Kobo, Canton, Cincinnati, Dayton, Lima, Ohio, Toronto, and everywhere in between. If you like results, this Mark James book, Wrestling Record Book, Detroit 1964 to 1980, spectacular.
And I was going to say another thing, I'm jumping around and I'm going to throw back to John, was when we were all doing Pen Pals, that sort of ended up, a lot of us started going, oh, wait, we're going to start. There was no Super Betamax. That wouldn't come until like late 74 for the fans. The fans with some money, but we were taping with old cassettes. First, Rich Frisk was one of the first guys I know when Roy Shire started, had his first card, whatever it was, because he started doing TV in 60, but he didn't even run a live show till 61. Rich Frisk with his TV with Walt Harris, who was a local, the strongest network, non-network affiliate, Channel 2, Walt Harris doing the commentary. So an actual news guy doing wrestling commentary, and then later roller derby for Jerry Seltzer. Rich Frisk fan, who's later a ref for Roy Shire, taped on reel-to-reel the audio for every single Shire show. And so later on, years later, I would do that in LA and trade tapes with, Rizzy would send the New York interviews, like with King Curtis, and when he held the tag straps, those insane, fantastic interviews. George Beppu, Jeff Walton, and I would get his audio cassettes from Hawaii, and Diane Devine, and so on. And somebody from Detroit, I can't remember who was sending them.
Over your right shoulder, I like your laser disc player there. Yeah, that's your left shoulder, Mike. Your laser disc collection. All kinds of
crap in here. Yeah, I'm a little tired. I was jamming to get back here, but let me throw back to. So, were you doing any of the audio cassette trading, late 60s or 70s stuff?
No.
So we started doing. So I could pull out the old KCOP theme song, which nobody even remembers. I was trying to ask Jeff, where did you get that? Was it generic music with the stuff where you would see at the beginning? It was just visual of Tolis getting his head thrown into various turnbuckles and selling.
Right now and for years, I can kick myself in the behind because every time from this would have been starting in like 1963, 1964, all the way through maybe 1970, 71. Every time big time wrestling would show on TV here, I would tape just the interviews. Like Lord Layton would be interviewing Bobo or Ernie Roth, everybody, Mark Lewin, and I taped those out a recorder on cassette tapes. So I had that whole collection of stuff. But then it's like when I started getting myself into music and my bands and things like that, I would take tape over those cassettes to tape my band stuff. We were doing recordings in the studio, or we'd be rehearsing and stuff, and I'd tape over this stuff only because I was too cheap to go buy new tapes. And to this day I regret taping over that stuff.
And John, I didn't get your email with the attachment until just now because I was out all day. But I'm sure John's going to want you to talk about now music. The third level. There are many facets of Dave Burzynski, Dave Drason, the performer, the wrestling, photography, but now the music, and how you incorporated that into your heel manager character, taking that all over the world.
Which was the direction I was going to go, managing. But go ahead, Mike.
Oh, okay. You were going to manage too?
No.
With
I was kind of getting the managing and the
before even Cyndi Lauper's then fiance. I don't think they ever got married. Then they broke up.
Dave Wolf.
I forget what his name was. Dave Wolf. And Jimmy Hart, you would see when he was brought in, he started wearing the ties. But I think he stole that from Dave because Dave was wearing musical notes on his outfit, I think, before Jimmy Hart even did.
Yeah.
I think he took it from you.
He may have, but I'll say this, I don't get the credit and I don't care about it. But when I first started managing in 1974, even prior to that, when I was doing demo interviews that the Sheik would be taping me at our Williamston office, I mean, he was grooming me onto how to do promos. And I would always use entrance music, in the background of the promos. And even when I started managing, almost every guy that I managed, I was using entrance music. This is way before WWF and WWE was doing it. I mean,
was this before Michael Hayes?
Pardon me?
Was this before Michael Hayes?
Way before
him. I was using, like Motley Crue, Wasp, just that entrance music for my guys. Nothing for the Sheik, of course. And, I don't get the credit for it. Everybody says, Vince McMahon introduced all this, music, entrances and stuff. And it's like the only one that I can say who did it prior to me that I know of is when Sheik brought in, this would have been 1968, I think, 67, 68. He brought in a wrestler named Batman. And over the loudspeaker, no, not Tony Marino.
Was it? No.
Yeah, this was another guy who came in, and they over the loudspeaker they played the Batman entrance music. So this happened twice. So this would have been over a 2-week span. One Kobo show, and he appeared at another Kobo show. There was no more Batman. I guess ABC contacted Sheik or the office and said, hey, you're on, infringing on copyright here. So the Batman never appeared again and never did the music. But then in, like New York and Pittsburgh and stuff, Tony Marino, he first started out as Batman with a 1T. But then, I guess Bruno or, whoever, was doing Pittsburgh and Philly, promoting at that time, ABC got a hold of them, and Tony Marino says, I'll just add another T to it. So his name was Battman, and ABC couldn't do anything about it, and he made a nice career of it for a few years.
When Bruno was running Pittsburgh, Vince let him run that for like a year or two, using guys like Johnny DeFazio, a young John L. Sullivan, who later became Johnny Valiant, and others there. Phil Sack, I think.
The
Phil
Sicilians.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Tony Altamori and Albano.
Yeah, Tony Altamori and Lou Albano. And then, their name was the Sicilians. And then I guess the Mafia came and, threatened them to get rid of that name, which they ended up having to do.
No wonder Albano drank.
Dave just left L.A. in '74 when Gorgeous George Jr. came in from the Deep South to L.A., and they haven't come out with a male manager spraying the ring with Chanel No. 5 and all that. So it was May, June of '74. And Gorgeous George is not his last widow, but the widow, the more famous one, Cherie Dupree, who did all the valeting of him. She sued Mike LaBelle or threatened all that. They changed his name to the Gorgeous One for the Saturday TV after that, and he was gone. It was too much trouble for the office, similar thing. But very quickly, the history of music entrance stuff, Gorgeous George with Pomp and Circumstance and Buddy Rogers, X amount of times used, Nat King Cole's Nature Boy. And then Bad Bad Leroy Brown used that in Dallas in 77 and 77 Los Angeles, that theme just on a long loop way before the Freebirds. And I think there were some other ones. Even Ray Candy, when he had the hood on in Florida, was using some jazz song named something super, I guess it was called Superfly, but it was a jazz.
I can see Jonathan in the background. He's jumping up and down, waiting to ask questions here.
No, go ahead. I'm enjoying listening.
Okay, let's go. Let's keep on the music. Jonathan, because I haven't opened up the attachment, I better let you ask your music, etc. questions.
Well, it wasn't music per se, but I do have one because Mike brought this to my attention earlier, and I figured I'd wait and save this till we were here because me and Dave were talking throughout the week, setting us up and all that stuff. But what kind of relationship do you have with Alice Cooper?
None really.
Okay.
I mean, I've been to a few of his concerts and backstage this would have been back in the 70s when I was the photographer at Kobo. But then it was like, this was just pre-COVID. He and I got together for dinner downtown Detroit because he was in town doing a new CD of like a Detroit tribute kind of thing. I don't know. I can't remember the name of the CD that he came out with. It might have been like Detroit Stories or something like that. But he got a bunch of Detroit musicians that he did this CD with. And, him and I, had dinner. His wife, his manager was there, my wife, a couple other friends of mine from LA. And we just had a great time.
Well, I want to jump into managing, the art of managing, and you said, what was the line you said to me the other day when we were talking about, well, where are we going to go with this as far as topics and stuff? You go, what did you say? It was almost like I was a stalker, or how did you put that?
Well, because you knew so much about my career. It's like,
Okay.
a lot of people don't. I mean, when you sent me like a little topic thing that you wanted to touch on, I mean, one of the first things that I saw was the Scholar. And it's like, how many people in the wrestling world know who the Scholar was? And it's like, the Scholar, that's what the Sheik. Well, here, let me set this up in a way.
Better than George Steele, who was the student, by the way.
Yeah. But when I was doing practice promos and I was still the photographer, for Sheik, he knew I wanted to be a manager. And it's like, back then, this would have been mid-70s. I mean, most managers were ex-wrestlers or guys who could really talk on the mic for guys who couldn't, to put them over. Now, here's an, 18-year-old kid wanting to become a manager. And it's like, it didn't happen. Never happened in, the wrestling world up until that time. And the Sheik says, well, you're my photographer. people around Kobo and around the territory, they know you. They've seen your face and stuff. So how would it be if I just one day put you as a manager and not the photographer? And people would go, well, you know, what's this? Wait a minute. So I understood that. So he goes, I'm going to put you under a mask. And my good friend Danny Goddard borrowed me a white mask that looked like Mr. Wrestling 1. And he sent it to me. And it's like I put it on and I did a few practice promos with it. And she goes, perfect. I'm going to have you, and I'm going to call you the Scholar. And it's like, oh, okay. You know, I was hoping for the Dave Drason kind of thing, but now I'm the Scholar. So my first 3 shows that I ever did, this would have been October of 1974. I did Pontiac, Michigan, Kalamazoo, and Battle Creek. And I managed beautiful Ben Justice, who had just, you know, turned heel at the time. You know, he was a good, when he was a babyface, he was working with the Stomper. But then he turned heel, and Ben wasn't a really good talker on TV. So Sheik says, well, I'm going to put you with him. You could do the talking for him. And, you know, and I did the first 3 shows, and that was it. I couldn't figure out how come I'm not getting any more bookings. Now I'm more back to, you know, shooting, you know, pictures of Kobo for Sheik and writing the body press, you know, program. And it's like, that's where they figured, you know, they were making the most money from me, you know, because my first 3 payoffs, I got $15 each, you know, which, you know, I thought that was, you know, I didn't think it was big money, but, you know, hey, at least I got my foot in the door, you know. But I'll never forget this. My 3rd show, working with Ben Justice, and all 3 shows we worked against Tony Marino. And Tony Marino was a good friend. And I'll even say this about Tony. The very first time I managed Ben, October 9th, 1974, against Tony Marino, I did one of those atomizer things, you know, spraying Ben beautiful, and I sprayed it in Tony's eyes, and, you know, that started the match and got the heat going. And after the bout was over, I think I interfered and we got disqualified. But that night, away from Pontiac, Michigan, Tony and I went down to Greektown in downtown Detroit and celebrated my first, you know, day of managing. And he bought me dinner, and he even bought me a mini bottle of champagne that I never opened, because at that time I didn't drink, that I still have to this day. But the 3rd show that I worked, we were in Battle Creek, Michigan. And me and Ben get in the ring. They introduce, you know, Tony first. And now they're introducing, you know, Ben. And then they introduce, you know, and accompanied by his manager, the Scholar. And out of the cheap seats way up in the bleachers, I hear, hey, Burzynski! And it's like, oh, my God! You know, and I didn't sell it at all. And it's like, you know, nobody else in the arena probably knew what the heck a Burzynski was either. So, oh, man, somebody, you know, knew who the heck I was.
Well, within all that, before I get into the art of managing and all that kind of stuff, I'm curious to know, within that story there, I heard somewhere else, as part of my stalkerism, I guess you would say, and I say that tongue in cheek, but you told a story about getting into managing and all, and the Sheik seeing you and getting kind of upset in his production truck. So what was the story?
Well, because, you know, I worked the first 3 shows like I just talked about. This would have been in October of 1974. And through the end of 74 and into 75, I was still writing the body press and, you know, doing the photography for him. And I was still waiting for that chance. And I wasn't going to go up to the Sheik and say, hey, you know, should have got off the pot, mister. You know, that wasn't going to happen. And then it was like early 1975, Killer Brooks Tony Marino, Ben Justice, Dr. Beach, Sheik's booker, Jack Kane, and his main announcer, Terry Sullivan, they started their own promotion, Universal Wrestling, UWA. They, just didn't show up for a Kobo show, and the very next night they had a show in Toledo. And then they had TV and everything, but they didn't have a manager. And they contacted me and said, hey, here's your opportunity. Tony and Brooks, they want you to be our number one manager. And it's like, okay, I'm going to jump at the chance. So I worked my very first show I worked for them at the Mimico Arena in Toronto. And I did that show, drove home. I got home at like 4 a.m. And at the same time, I had a separate job. I was working for a local TV station in Detroit, Channel 50, and I was writing TV commercials. And I had a client that we were going to go and film 3 commercials that I had worked on, written everything up. But we were going to use the Sheik's mobile TV truck to film them instead of, doing them at the studio. It was a lot cheaper for my client. So we're there, we're doing, the commercials and everything. We get done and it's like Sheik pops in. It's like, oh, cool. And it's like, he goes, he gives me the finger. Come here. We go in the TV truck and boy, news traveled fast. I hear you worked the show up in Toronto last night, against Tunnies, who he was still booking, for the Tunnies back then. I go, yeah. He says, I'm very disappointed in you. I says, well, I've been waiting for my opportunity, to manage. That's what I want to do. You know that. And he goes, you should have came to me first. I says, I've been waiting. And it's like, we talked a little bit, and then his final words were, I suggest you really watch yourself because you never know when someone's going to break your legs. And it scared the living hell out of me. It's like anybody who's around the Sheik is just scared if he says something or he doesn't say something. You always walk on eggshells when you're around that guy, And it's like scared the heck out of me. And I stayed close to my, clients and stuff. Nothing happened. And, I went on to my managing career and, unfortunately the Sheik's promotion just went downhill. And, not to say that I had anything to do with it, but then years later, when the Big Time Wrestling folded, and I was doing shows for, Malcolm Monroe and Al Costello, Mike Anthony and Ricky Cortez. All 3 were doing, different shows around this, Detroit and Ohio. Big Jim Lancaster, I was working shows for him, worked with Al Snow, but then there was this one show that I'm working on. I'm managing Malcolm Monroe. And I get in the dressing room and there's the Sheik. And it's like, should I, just keep my distance? Does he still want to break my legs or anything like that? But he was the one that put his hand out and said, Dave, good to see you. Then we talked a little bit. He had said, he heard about, my managing career and stuff. And he didn't have anybody, there was no Eddie Creechman at that time or Abdullah Farouk for him. And he asked me if I would manage him that night. And to this day, it's the greatest thrill in my wrestling career. The first time I managed the Sheik. And I managed him for the next couple of years, off and on here and there. Excuse me for 1 second. Hello? Triple H. WWE? Yeah. You want me to manage in WWE? Hey, right now I'm doing an interview with my good friend Mike Lano on TV right now. So, yeah. No, you can't. You can't have any of my time right now. Go screw yourself, Triple H. God damn it, you had a chance in the 80s and 90s to use me, and you didn't. So you go to hell, Triple H. I'll call you back, Jerry. Son of a bitch.
Since that bastard.
Yeah, Vince McMahon kills goddamn managers, uses goddamn, the TNA, the tit and ass kind of crap with women, kills managers, off the face of the planet. Now he's calling me and asking me to come manage. He's got Paul Heyman. Forget it. I don't need his money or anything. He's desperate.
And I was going to say there, because it's convenient, before I ask the other managing question, it's convenient you got the call because pay-per-view is in Montreal, and I know there was a great trip story you told of a major snowstorm going to and from Montreal.
Oh, Jesus. That was, I always call that, it can't get any worse. I don't want to get into the story per se.
Go check it out on Big Time Memories. I'll put it that way.
If I can mention Big Time Memories, people who...
Let me put that over. Those are the greatest free documentaries, and it's on one of the greatest territories ever, done in the most professional way by Dave and Terry. It's amazing. It's a learning experience for everyone, and it's absolutely free. And you're going to hopefully do some more.
Well, you just say Terry, but people watching, it's myself and Terry Sullivan, who, me and him met as fans back in 1967 and have been friends ever since. And, I was lucky to get into the wrestling, business with the Sheik and Big Time Wrestling as the photographer and writing the body press. Terry got his, opportunity to be a ring announcer and then, lead, commentator, for the TV show. And then he went on to, work once, Big Time Wrestling folded. He did Bruiser Bedlam, for Dick the Bruiser's, promotion that came into Detroit and stuff. So when the opportunity came for, to tell the true story of, the Big Time Wrestling territory, we got, involved with Rox TV, and they gave us the forum to do this show that we didn't know what we were going to do. We were doing features on, a particular wrestler doing like a This Is Your Life. And we, tell, facts and figures and everything about this wrestler. And we'd interject our own personal stories, into them. So the show became, rock. I mean, if you ever go to YouTube, go to Rox TV, ROX TV, and Big Time Memories. And we have done exposés on the Sheik and Bobo and Pampero Firpo, Tex McKenzie, everybody that worked the Detroit territory. Plus, we've done what's called Dressing Room Confidential episodes, where our stories just don't fit into a particular guy, and we tell these hilarious or adventurous stories that have never been told to anybody before. And our shows have got a big following. We the best way to watch them is on YouTube, the replays. But they've been on so many different forums across the world that we have such a big following, and just so many, even wrestlers, who contact me, that are still work the Big Time or still alive anyway. They enjoy them. Jim Cornette enjoys them. Those people.
Goddamn. No.
But yeah. We're very proud of, a lot of the episodes that we've done. People still ask for more, but, right now we're on hiatus. We're not sure if we're going to do any more. I'm in negotiation right now for a PBS station in Detroit who wants to air them. But we may have to refilm, and do different things, to get them in their time frame. Because some of our shows, when we started out, we were doing like 20, 25 minutes. But then we did a 2-part Dick the Bruiser that was like 45, 50 minutes each episode.
Yeah.
Some of our, dressing room confidentials, we'd have like 4 or 5 topics. But then something would trigger a memory, and Terry would go, and then he'd say something and it'd trigger a memory of me. And, we'd throw that in there, and it just snowballed into these great episodes. So if anybody wants to learn the true history of the Detroit territory, that's what I say. Go to Rocks TV, Big Time Memories. You'll learn it all.
Well, my final question, I have 2. But one going back to the managing and the art of managing. And you mentioned when Triple H called there about Paul Heyman and such, and who's killing it, even though he's not using the manager name per se. But managers, especially during the time you guys were coming up with the industry and such, they were the mouthpieces that brought folks to the buildings, which is where everybody made their money. But for you, I know you were fortunate enough to learn the art of the promo and also what to look for and what not to look for by the great Bobby Heenan. So could you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, when I was, a fan, let's put it that way, I was always a fan of the managers more than anything. Because when they'd go on TV and they'd say these outrageous things, it's like, you got to be kidding me. This is going to happen. This is going to happen, or this or that. I learned that. And, I was fortunate when I, wanted, guys that knew I wanted to be a manager, Bobby Heenan, George Cannon, and Ernie Roth, Abdullah Farouk. All 3 of them helped me, along the way. I would ask them and, dig in their mind. George Cannon helped me, really how to do a good promo. Ernie Roth, told me and taught me, you're not the focus as a manager, out at the ring. You're a secondary guy. You're, there to help your guy. So the focus isn't on you. Never put the focus on you until the right time. Whether the match was going a little slow or you needed to distract the referee. So you're, like say the Sheik needed to do something, to dig out a pencil or, choke, with a rope or, whatever it could be. And Bobby Heenan, he was like, even though I learned, all the other stuff from the other guys, Bobby Heenan really told me about, taking bumps. And he showed me how to take bumps. And it's like, when I was a fan, watching managers and watching, the in-ring action, sort of, I knew what I wanted to see, come when the heat's really building and the finish is going to come and or if the manager is going to get involved, or, the baby face goes over, what could be better? I mean, the fans are going nuts to start with. What could be better? He gets his hands on the manager. The pop of the crowd just triples. So it's like, I was athletic. Played baseball in all sports as, a young kid. And I was, 142 pounds and 6'2". And I was agile and athletic. So I let these guys, I knew at the end of most of the matches that I've ever worked, I'd get involved. Even if say, the Sheik or Malcolm Monroe won. Okay. But to save face for the other guy, say Bobo or Louis Martinez or whoever our opponent was, they lost. Now the fans think, oh, but if I get involved and let them, giving me bumps and, whatever, Bobo giving me the headbutt, and holding on to me. He would hit me and I'd stagger around the ring and I'd fall back into his arms. He'd hit me again. I'd really stagger around the ring, but I fell back into his arms again. And then he'd give me another one and I'd, do a bump over the top rope, or I'd do a flip in the corner. Now the crowd's going nuts. They're going home happy. Mm-hmm. So that's, my take on what I wanted to see and what I thought I should give to the fans in return.
Well, Bobby Heenan had the best line I ever heard when it comes to managing and the business in general for the art form that he had and the other greats do. And that is, you manage like you're a wrestler and you wrestle like you're a manager.
Exactly.
But you just mentioned a guy's name that was going to be part of my final question, because I heard you tell a story about him, which I found hilarious, and that's Louis Martinez. And there was apparently
Arriba.
Yeah. No, not Tito.
Yeah.
Louis was the first guy to do Arriba.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's apparently a story where he may have pissed off the Sheik and you were ringside. And can you tell this story?
I'll try to tell it as quickly as I can.
Okay.
We're in Dayton, Ohio. Sheik versus Louis Martinez. We're in the dressing room, and it's like, it's customary you be to the show an hour before time, before showtime. So it's 8:00, showtime, 7:00, everybody should be there. It's almost 8:00. Louis Martinez ain't there yet. It's 8:30. Louis Martinez ain't there yet. 9:00. It's like, now Sheik is, thinking, well, we have to do a, substitute match because Louis ain't going to make it. So a little after 9:00, Louis Martinez shows up. And I could tell Louis had a few Wiedemann's beers. And it's like he gets in the dressing room just enough time to, he's dressing and we're going over the finish. So it's like, okay, and Louis, goes to the Sheik, I must be a little sick. I must have flu or something. No bumps, please. No bumps. Sheik goes, oh, okay. So anyway, we go out for the match. Match starts. Bang, 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 bang. They're doing their regular stuff. Then at one point, Sheik throws Louis outside the ring to set up the finish. And what he did, Louis would always, go outside the ring, and then he'd crawl under the ring and surprise his opponent from the backside. He'd crawl under the ring, and the fans could see him coming up. Bing, bang, boom, a whole big, thing going to the finish. Sheik throws Louis out. Louis goes under the ring, and it's a while. Louis ain't coming out the other end. And it's like, I go over to Sheik, and Sheik comes over to me. He goes, what the hell's going on? And it's like, I don't know. So I look under the ring. There's Louis, mid-ring, curled up in a fetal position like a baby. He fell asleep. Holy crap. So I told Sheik, it's like, yeah, he's sleeping under there. So anyway, Sheik gets out, goes under the ring. And then the next thing you know, both of them come out the opposite end. They get back in the ring and, they're trying to set up the finish. So it's like, oh. So what happens is Sheik picks up Louis and he gives him a body slam. And it's like Louis said, no bumps. Yep. Louis is shivering in the middle of the ring, and fans can't, they're seeing that. But I can hear Louis saying, oh, don't shoot. So it's like, then it's like, oh, geez, Sheik doesn't know. So it's like Sheik, does a couple things, hits him, and takes him up, gives him about another body slam. Now Louis is really reeling in the ring, and I can hear it. Don't shoot. And then it's like, Sheik, goes, gets him. And he was going to pick him up again and didn't know what was going to happen. Well, Louis reversed it, and he gets the Sheik, hits him, bomb. Sheik sits down, and Louis, one of his famous holds is the Indian deathlock, where the Sheik is sitting, and Louis puts one leg over the other, and he's sitting on his shoulders, and he picks up his legs. So that's the move he did. So he gets the Sheik's sitting. Louis gets on top of him, picks up his legs, and he lifts up Sheik's legs, and he looks up in the sky. He goes, Arriba! And the next thing I could see, Louis' trunks in the back are blowing up like a puffer fish. And it's like he does another Arriba! And then it's like, all I hear was like that. And just crap is coming out of all orifices, out of Louis' legs. It's running down his legs, and it's running down the Sheik's back. And now Sheik is like, what the heck? He breaks up the hole. It's like he feels this. Oh my! And it stunk. It stunk so bad. So Sheik comes over to me, jumps out of the ring. He says, stall. He runs all the way back to the dressing room. And I'm on the apron, and I'm, taunting Louis, and I'm, the referee. Now I'm telling the referee, hey, I got to stall. They got to go in the finish here. And it's like, we stalled for it seemed like forever, but it was like 2-3 minutes. Apparently, Sheik went in the shower, showered off, and came back to get this, poop off of him. He came back in the ring, and it's like boom, boom, boom. And they didn't go through the finish that they were supposed to. They just ended up fighting all the way back to the dressing room. Now we get back into the dressing room. Match is over, both disqualified. Sheik says, everybody out. All the guys in the dressing room, because at that time we shared one dressing room. We didn't have two separate dressing rooms. All the boys and us, we got out. And next thing we know, we could just hear the Sheik just beating the hell out of Louis, and it's like, we finally got back in, and I ended up driving Louis home. It was a bad situation, but that was the night Louis pooped all over the Sheik.
Dr. Mike, do you want to have anything to wrap here on your end?
Oh, that reminds me of Andre, who was heavily drunk in Mexico, his only tour of Mexico with Bad News Alan Coach and Rodney Anawahe, later known as Yokozuna, where Andre accidentally shit in the ring as well. Dave, I was just going to say, to learn bumps, was Lou Klein already gone, or did Louis train you for bumping?
Lou Klein?
Yes, Lou Bastien.
Oh, God. No, I wasn't going to pay that exorbitant amount of money to have him do anything for me. No, Lou Klein was a shyster, and, all the guys he trained, he screwed those guys. I'll say it these days. You didn't want to say it back then, but, Mickey Doyle, he'll tell you, Louis would, take guys on the road, do shows, drive them. He'd charge them trans. And then he'd bring sandwiches, give the guys sandwiches, and then he'd charge the guys for sandwiches, out of his pay, out of their pay. So by the time, the guys got their payoff, Louis took all their payoff. So
where in the hell did you get, or guys would get 2.5 cents per mile for the trains? Where did the 1/2 cent come from?
I have no idea. My first 3, the only time I've ever paid trans was my first 3 shows that I did with Ben Justice. And I was his manager, and he charged me trans. I think my trans, because there was 4 of us, he had a van kind of thing. That's when guys were doing these conversion vans and, seats in the back and, luxury and, big stereos and stuff. And I know he charged me trans, but by the end of the day with the trans, we'd always stop for like a bologna blowout kind of thing, after the shows, and, something to drink. By the time I got home and got my payoff, I made nothing, that's the way it was. Well, managers didn't make, top pay either, anybody, Abdullah Farouk and,
was Ernie properly paid, though? Somebody this caliber? Because he was a veteran by that point.
he must have did okay by Sheik, but he had another job because he was a weatherman, at a station in Ohio. So he had other, media jobs. But I mean, he must not have been making too much, because then he ended up going to WWF and working for Vince Sr., where he made, more money. And plus he can get, Bobby Harmon over, which Harmon wasn't getting over in Detroit, by no means.
Later become Beautiful Bobby. I only asked you that about Luke Klein. I knew that would get you going. So that was kind of a question. Let me just ask, though, did you, final question, because of your brilliance as a photographer, did you keep it up post managing once your wrestling career was done? I'm sure you've kept up with the photography all traveling around the world.
Yeah. Oh, well, I've always had, good cameras and stuff, and I traveled the world, and I've taken, photographs around the world. And, why I say this is that, back in the day, myself and my wife, we'd go on vacation, we'd shoot, 2,000, photographs. And that's when we're using film. This is pre-digital. Well, you'd have the photographs, developed, pay exorbitant amounts of money for that many rolls of film, 40, 50 rolls of film. And then you put them in photo albums, and then people, you want to show them your trip, you'd look through a photo album. Well, nowadays, what I did, even when I got into digital, I would scan my photographs, and then I would do, videos. So that way you can watch them on the big screen, and I'd put traditional music behind them. So if you go to my, YouTube channel, just type in Dave Burzynski. I just did 12 videos on our recent trip to New York City. And it's all different, topics, just the city itself. And I love shooting graffiti and the Metropolitan Museum of Art and MoMA, the Modern Art Museum, and people and faces that I see. So even now, I've done that, and I've done, like Egypt and, cities across the world, that I've been to. And right now I'm working on my recent trip that we've been to Amsterdam, Prague, Vienna, and Budapest, Hungary. So I have like 4,000 pictures that, I'm culling right now together, and gonna do videos and, put traditional music behind everything and put them on YouTube for people to watch.
And so I will wrap with this. And as you mentioned, there's the Dave Burzynski page on YouTube, which I have a link for. I will have a link for the Big Time Wrestling and Rocks TV. I did see a link for the wine, which I'll confirm with you afterwards. We'll put that out there. And is there anything else we want to put out there, link-wise, for people to see all things Supermouth?
A lot of stuff will be on my YouTube channel. The bands that I've played with, bands that I do publicity stuff for, like the Twistin' Tarantulas, Horse Cave Trio with my good friend, Ron DeVore, and Lou Simon, the Orbitsons. I'm doing, Twistin' Tarantulas. I'm going to see their show tomorrow, which I haven't seen them in a few years, with my good friend Pistol Pete. Other videos on my channel, bands that I play with, like Rival, with my good friend Richard Long and Tommy Shather, which no longer exists because our rhythm guitar player Ed Deal had passed away. So there's, things on there on YouTube, my shows for a band called Rival that I was in. And even Neil Young sent us an email praising us for our version of Rockin' in the Free World that we did. So I'm always proud of that. So there's just so many things. My photography, my wine, man, there's so much stuff that, we haven't even touched on today that, if I'm fortunate enough you to bring me back, and if fans, like what, the show, and Crazy Train, please, fans, this isn't an easy thing, for these gentlemen to do. It costs money. If you're a fan of Crazy Train and you like the show and like all the other shows that they do, please support these guys. Send them $1, $5, 10, 20, whatever you can afford. Promote independent shows like this. They're wonderful. They're educational. And they got me on it.
Of course. And I definitely think, because we only touched on half the notes that I had, there's definitely going to be a part 3, because I know there's more stories with you. That's for sure.
Hey, we got to bring
so.
it back.
It's always fun,
But
good to see your, face, Jonathan.
Of course.
Dr. Mike, I can't almost say the same.
Like I said, I don't know how the hell he got the password earlier, but with that, as we wrap, do you think, I know Terry jumped on for the Children's Hospital event, but do you think he'd jump on and shoot stories with you?
Yes.
Right on.
Yeah, I'll talk Terry into doing it, just because right now we're not doing, any more big time memory shows until, things get straightened out. But, if this is
we could
our
cover
form,
some other territories. We could cover some other things that you guys may have had some knowledge, experience in them.
Yeah, me and Terry would love to do it. We just let us know if, when, and however. Send us, our check.
The royalties. Yeah, we will make it work for a part 3 and have Terry involved.
God bless Terry Jarrett, and let's bring the Sheik's U.S. title belt from Japan back to the U.S. where it friggin' belongs.
Yes. I doubt that'll happen, Mike, but it would be great.
Exactly. And as I flip through the Brian Solomon's book here, which you had a hand in talking about the Sheik in that book. But Dave, thank you so much for the time.
Let me say that's the greatest wrestling book I've ever read. The most researched wrestling book ever done on a guy that he couldn't interview. It was a dead wrestler. Brian Solomon did an amazing job. I'll say this. If you don't have it, get it. Greatest wrestling book ever written.
ECW Press. Dave, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Mike. Good to see you guys again.
Hey there, Friday fans. We know how much you enjoy the movies. Enjoy grabbing your Friday merchandise and interacting with the Friday family, whether it be at conventions or during our particular watch-alongs. Well, when you're looking to get yourself masks, why not check out our friends over at Camp Blood Customs out of New York State and order your specific custom mask from any of the films. All orders are made specifically. Your needs and wants are. Make sure you find Camp Blood Customs on Facebook, Instagram, and all over social media and order yours today.
Hello, everybody. This is Jumpin' Jim Brunzell, and if I was you, I'd listen to Crazy Train Radio.